Okay, excellent. All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce Mary Villa, our recently retired curator. Mary was with the Connecticut College Arboretum for 18 years and really has brought the Arboretum to be a real Arboretum. And when I say a real Arboretum, I mean, we are a level 3 accredited Arboretum. And that only comes with meticulous plant records and documentation of all of our plants. And there's no way that we could have ever achieved this without Mary's record keeping, her creativity, and her dedication to the plants of the Connecticut College Arboretum. We have 750 acres, about 100 and I'll say 60 without doing proper math, acres though are of plant collection. So our Connecticut College campus is 125 acres. We have the Caroline Black Garden across from the main entrance of campus here, which is a 4-acre garden. And we have our 30-acre native plant collection. And the native plant collection is where we will be on our tour next week and where Mary will show us the native deciduous azaleas. I'm sure she'll go into details more about our azalea accreditation, but she also went through probably more strenuous and more detailed procedures to get our azalea collection to be nationally accredited as well. So we're very lucky to have our azalea expert and plant expert, Mary Villa, with us here today. So Mary, I will let you take it over, and I'm here if we have any technical difficulties.
Thank you, Maggie.
If you would please hold your questions to the end, that would make for a smoother presentation. We'll have plenty of time for questions.
First of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I see many friendly faces and friends here, so thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. I would like to tell you about the native azaleas of the Connecticut College Arboretum, along with the larger story about the native azaleas of Eastern North America, their occurrences and their behavior. Okay. I'm going to be right up front and tell you about the books that I looked at, because I'm going to be referring to some of them throughout my presentation. And they're really great books if you ever want to look into the subjects a little deeper. The Brother Gardeners by Andrea Wolf, American Azaleas by L. Clarence Toe, Wild Plants of America by Richard M. Smith, articles by Henry T. Skinner entitled In Search of Native Azaleas that were published in the Morris Arboretum Bulletins, January and April 1955. America's Native Azaleas, published in the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens Handbook on Rhododendrons and Their Relatives. And A Short History of Botany in the United States by Joseph Ewan. It didn't photograph so well, didn't have a nice picture on the cover, so I'm holding it up here. Joseph Ewan, E-W-A-N. It's really amazing the things you learn when you go to put together a presentation like this. So I'm going to be getting into a little history of plant collecting in this country, just to get back to where native azaleas started being seen and known. And I learned that before 1600, there were some 30 plants that were collected and sent to Europe, including Maggie's tulip tree, black walnut, the American chestnut, red mulberry, prickly pear. I'm looking at botanical names and trying to give you the common names. That's why I'm hesitating here. Smilax, our lovely greenbrier, arborvitae. Anyway, I thought you might find that interesting to know. The native azaleas of eastern United States were admired and frequently recorded by the first European travelers on this continent. Several species found their way to Europe at an early date and were known to Linnaeus. In 1678, English botanist John Bannister arrived in Virginia. For the next 14 years, he sent seeds, specimens, drawings, and notes to English correspondents until his death in 1692. In 1728, Native American-born botanist John Bartram began assembling native plants at his farm near Philadelphia. In 1731, he established the first botanic garden in this country, which still exists and is located on the banks of the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. Starting in 1733, Bartram began sending seeds from newly discovered deciduous azalea species to Europe. In 1734, Bartram sent rhododendron canescens, paraclimenoides, and viscosum to Peter Collinson, a British clothing merchant and amateur botanist. It was the beginning of a 35-year friendship with a busy traffic of seeds and plants from America to England and on to the continent. In 1748, Peter Kalm, a Finnish student of Linnaeus, visited America. He spent 3 years exploring from Philadelphia to Montreal. However, Kalm attributed much of his information to wrong sources and frequently failed to acknowledge his sources, leaving many Americans insulted. And Benjamin Franklin said of Kalm that one should beware of strangers who keep journals. Benjamin Franklin was a friend of John Bartram's. Kalm did manage to add new species and even new genera of American plants to the literature. Linnaeus named mountain laurel Kalmia after him. There were others who visited John Bartram at his garden, learned the details of new plants from Bartram, made notes and drawings, found the plants in the wild where Bartram told them to look, and later published them as their own discoveries. I'm going to give you a quote from the Short History of Botany in the United States. This quote is relating to the travels of John and his son, William Bartram, in the southeastern US, which was sponsored by Collinson and Dr. Fothergill. Here's the quote. By a cruel twist of fate, the specimens, descriptions, and drawings of the many discoveries that they made were given manuscript names and set aside in the cabinets of English botanists without publication, while Britishers were engrossed with the plants of Cook's voyages to the exciting South Pacific. Other botanists revisited Bartram localities, some of them after calling at the Bartram Garden to learn particulars, and described Bartram discoveries in print under their own names. Seems like it's a cutthroat world there. During a visit to the Morris Arboretum in Philadelphia, I learned about Dr. Henry T. Skinner and a research project that was initiated at the Morris Arboretum in cooperation with the University of Pennsylvania Botany Department and the Academy of Natural Sciences. Awareness of limitations of knowledge of the botany, genetics, and geographic distribution of the native azaleas led to this research project. Heading up the project was Henry Skinner, who later went on to become the director of the U.S. National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. They planned for a 5-month trip that started out from Philadelphia on March 17th, 1951. They brought with them a map of the eastern US showing the geographic distribution of wild azaleas likely to be in flower during each week from mid-March to mid-August. They also had a large Rand McNally atlas with location data for previously collected species. This map showed where azaleas once grew, where a collection had not been made and places needing to be revisited to clarify questions concerning the original collection. The map up here is the itinerary of Skinner's trip. A journey of epic proportions. Skinner and his cohorts traveled 25,000 miles by car and countless miles by foot within a rectangle from Florida to Texas and from Missouri to coastal Virginia, north to Delaware, crossing Alabama and Georgia several times. They made collections from 7,360 plants, both species and naturally occurring hybrids. From this major field survey were secured 8,000 herbarium specimens and 500 living plants for further study. The herbarium specimens were cataloged and deposited in the herbarium of the Morris Arboretum of the University of Pennsylvania. It was 5 months of continuous travel over everything from first-class roads to trackless hillsides, through freezing spring floods of the Mississippi, or through summer drought and 104-degree temperatures. In 1972, L. Clarence Tao, who's the author of American Azaleas, embarked on a similar journey to see the native azaleas in their native habitats. He provides great descriptions of the azaleas in his book. The range maps included in this presentation are based on the maps prepared by Mr. Tao and created by Beverly Chomiak, senior lecturer in geology and GIS at Connecticut College. Skinner indexed data on flower color, flower blotch, flower tube hairs and glands, bud scale hairs, leaf hairs, and plant growth habit. Tao said Skinner's most important finding was that no species is stable across its range, that hybridization is ongoing, and most species show evidence of past or recent gene infiltration from other species. The focus of our collection are deciduous azaleas that are native to eastern North America. Currently, the Arboretum has 212 deciduous native azaleas representing all 16 accepted species that are listed here. We also have some natural hybrids and cultivars in the collection. The native azaleas have a color range from white to pink, red, and yellow. They may be dwarf or very tall, single-stemmed or stoloniferous. The southern New England climate is well suited for deciduous native azaleas. According to the 2012 USDA plant hardiness zone map, which may be out of date now, we are in zone 6B. New London is bordered by Long Island Sound to the south. Being coastal, it is among the mildest areas of New England. Summers are frequently hot and humid, and winters are cool with a mix of snow and rain. But I don't need to tell you all that. Okay, the Piedmont azalea, Rhododendron canescens. The pictures that are in this presentation are pictures of azaleas in the Connecticut College Arboretum collection. And I'm not going to read the flower color and the bloom time. It's there on the slide. I'm going to talk about the travels of Mr. Skinner and others who went and saw these plants in their native habitats. The first azalea species on Mr. Skinner's schedule was seen in a number of locations. The first one found along the edges of damp woods on the Florida side of the St. Mary's River. Also along the banks of the Suwannee River near White Springs. Skinner wrote, where on a warm day it was being worked by honeybees, bumblebees, and butterflies. Also found on the banks of the Yellow River in Okaloosa County. And Skinner wrote, where bushes became small trees of 15 feet or more with heavy branching trunks. After further travel, it was found again along the Sabine River in East Texas. He followed this species for several weeks and over enormous distances. Skinner wrote of an experience in the Ocala National Forest where he drove the Chevy delivery truck that had been provided by Morris Arboretum down a steep, sandy, and rutted road to a crossing of the Ocklawaha River, only to find that the bridge had been washed out in a previous storm. The only passable return route was in slow stages through undisturbed woodland with, quote, both darkness and the bottom of the gasoline tank staging a neck and neck approach. May 12, 1951, Skinner says, found again in the occasional sphagnum bogs which are scattered across the red soil land of southern Tennessee. And yes, there are alligators down there by the Ocklawaha River. Florida azalea, rhododendron astrinum. Apart from the flower color, it is similar to rhododendron canescens, but more glandular. Red pinhead glands cover pedicels and often flower tubes and vegetative shoots. On March 26, 1951, Skinner found this species near Geneva, Alabama, and a few hours later along a woodland edge just south of the Florida-Alabama border, and, quote, as far east as Georgia's Altamaha River, almost across from Old Fort Barrington and the former haunts of the long-lost Franklinia, end quote. I'm going to mention the native range here. It's Alabama, primarily to the Florida Panhandle and adjacent regions in Georgia and Mississippi. Florida azalea is a species of conservation concern. NatureServe ranks this species as globally vulnerable G3 across its range. Our wild collected plant came from seed that was collected in northern Florida. The Oconee azalea, rhododendron flammeum, August 20, 1951. This species was found in the Atlanta area, across central Georgia to Augusta, and down the Savannah River to Clio. Skinner wrote, in the vicinity of its original place of discovery by Andre Michaud at Two Sisters Ferry on the Savannah River, this species inhabits the fairly shady red clay bluffs of the West Bank, where specimens may be found in deep Saturn red. At Two Sisters Ferry, the present farm owner told me that he gave up the last ferry boat about 30 years ago. The old road to the river has long since grown up to brush, but some aged orange flowered specimens still grow near the boat landing, just as Michaud saw and described them in 1787. The coast azalea, Rhododendron atlanticum, April 27, 1951, in Burton, South Carolina. Skinner describes, where they held splendid pink blossoms found knee-high above fern and inkberry in the moist soils of cut-over oak woodland. Skinner also found it throughout the coastal counties of the Carolinas and Virginia. A week or two later, it was found blooming on the Delmarva Peninsula in Delaware. Low growing in habit. Quote, it is generally white flowered and often highly glandular with pinhead glands on leaves and shoots, as well as on the flower parts, end quote. May 22, 1951. The species was observed in Delaware along the Choptank River. Our wild collected plant came from Kent County, Delaware. And when I say our wild collected plant, I don't mean the plant was collected, I mean seed was collected and plants were grown from that seed. Pink shell azalea, Rhododendron vasii. The native range is rare in the wild. It's a high elevation species with only a few known populations in northeastern Georgia and western North Carolina. For this one, I went to R.M. Smith's book, and this is what he wrote. A short deviation from the Blue Ridge Parkway at mile 423.3 can be worthwhile. In early May, you might wish to drive down North Carolina Route 215 in the direction of Rossman for a few miles to enjoy the silver bell trees and the pink shell azaleas. We have a wild collected plant from Swain County, North Carolina. Pinkster bloom azalea, Rhododendron paraclimenoides. John Bartram, who was also known as King George II's botanist in America, sent Pinkster bloom azalea to the English plant collector, his friend, Peter Collinson. The long relationship between Bartram and Collinson is described in The Brother Gardeners. May 5th, 1951, Skinner checked populations of this species as it extended from Chesapeake Bay and the habitat of the coast azalea to the Blue Ridge Mountains near Sperryville and the home of the rose shell azalea, Rhododendron printophyllum. May 21, on a return visit, it was found blooming to 2/3 up the mountain. May 26, 1951, Skinner traveled to the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania and to the Finger Lakes region of central New York. On June 2nd, Skinner wrote, completion of the transect to the top of Pinnacle Peak in Shenandoah National Park. Elevation increase of approximately 2,400 feet, delayed flowering by almost a month. R.M. Smith wrote, quote, from the lower end of Shenandoah National Park near Waynesboro, Virginia, the Blue Ridge Parkway follows the eastern escarpment of the Southern Appalachians. South of Roanoke at mile 154.5, there is a loop trail that affords a pleasant introduction to the parkway flora in Virginia. The woods here consist mainly of oaks, red, scarlet, black, chestnut, and white among them. Flowering dogwood is the chief understory tree and is especially attractive in early May. Pinkster bloom azalea and flame azalea are two of the more colorful shrubs. Our wild collected Pinkster bloom azaleas come from the power line right-of-ways in the Connecticut College Arboretum. Rose shell azalea, Rhododendron printophyllum. Skinner found this species in many of the same areas where he found Pinkster bloom azaleas. R.M. Smith wrote about finding it on Spruce Knob, Pendleton County, West Virginia at 4,860 feet, the highest point in the state yet accessible by road. We have wild collected plants from Falls Village, Connecticut. They were donated by Lincoln Foster, a horticulturist, teacher, and author, and from Kings River Falls Natural Area in Madison County, Arkansas. Flame azalea, Rhododendron calendulaceum. Flame azalea was carried to Belgium and France instead of England in the form of plants and seeds by French botanist André Michaux. The plants were rescued from shipwreck and, as the story goes, spared to the personal intercession of the Empress Josephine when her husband Napoleon threatened to destroy the Botanic Garden in Ghent in 1802. May 8th, 1951, back to Skinner. Early flame azalea was full out in Georgia in Vogel State Park, also in a small ravine just north of Gainesville. And brilliant red colored flowers were observed in the lower elevations of the Southern Appalachian Mountains. Skinner found two forms of Rhododendron calendulaceum, a large flowered lower elevation population, which blooms in mid-May, and a population with smaller flowers, which blooms at the higher elevations in early to mid-June at the southern end of the Blue Ridge Parkway, from Soco to Great Pisgah Mountain. A late phase of the flame azalea was found on White Top Mountain and High Knob in Southwest Virginia in partially open bud. May 26, 1951. Seen in West Virginia in the region south of Morgantown and Elkins, abundant in the early large flowered form. June 24th, 1951. A late calendulaceum was seen on the high points of the Alleghenies from Grandfather Mountain and Mount Pisgah west to the Tennessee border. July 5th, 1951. Late calendulaceum seen on Gregory Bald in the Great Smoky Mountains, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Skinner and Smith thought this was the case, but current thinking based on ploidy studies suggests flame azalea is not present on Gregory Bald. It appears to be a hybrid swarm. And balds are mountain summits or crests covered primarily by thick vegetation or native grasses or shrubs occurring in areas where heavy forest growth would be expected. On July 4th, 1951, Skinner spent the night at Cade's Cover on the way to Gregory Bald. Skinner wrote, "The stiff 4.5-mile climb to the mountaintop was started in rather late afternoon. A cabin at about 4,900 feet elevation was reached at dusk, leaving just enough time to complete the distance to the summit for a preview of the azalea display before cooking supper and turning in for a night's rest. Unfortunately, the night's rest was enjoyed in the damp cold against which one blanket afforded little protection. It was also amid rather noisy wildlife, from inquisitively reconnoitering mice to larger creatures, perhaps bears, which by morning had spirited away my lone loaf of bread." July 10, 1951. Late calendulaceum is seen in full bloom near Nantahala Lake, North Carolina. While in North Carolina, Skinner visited the beetle collection, and that's not beetle, it's not the bug, it's Beadle, at Biltmore Forest. It is described as the largest collection of native azaleas that has ever been assembled in one place, numbering into the thousands. R.M. Smith sends us to Carver's Gap on the boundary line where Tennessee 143 meets North Carolina 261 and joins with the Appalachian Trail. At Round Bald, where you may see flame azaleas, in Smith's words, "Much has been written about the spectacular displays of flame azaleas in the Great Smoky Mountains. Few can surpass those on Gregory Bald. For those who prefer a much shorter trail, take the 2-mile trail from Klingman's Dome parking area to Andrews Bald. In June, flame azaleas and Catawba rhododendrons are in bloom." Of interest is the annual Roan Mountain Rhododendron Festival, which is held during the second half of June in Roan Mountain, Tennessee. According to their website, June 1947 saw the first of the rhododendron festivals, conceived and carried out by the Roan Mountain Citizens Club as a 2-day celebration to memorialize and perpetuate the most gorgeous display of natural beauty on the North American continent. Our plants were collected in the vicinity of Wayabald in Nantahala National Forest near Franklin, North Carolina. Alabama azalea, Rhododendron alabamense. May 12, 1951. The species was observed in full flower in Marshall County of north central Alabama, also seen in Coleman and Winston counties. mainly found on the fairly dry hilltops and eastern slopes, where it seems tolerant of considerably more shade. Skinner wrote, "It leaves the wooded hilltops to flow down sunny slopes to the Sipsey River in a mantle of May snow as far as the eye can see. This is unquestionably the clearest and showiest of all white native azaleas." Found primarily in Alabama, but crosses into central Tennessee to the north, sporadically across Georgia to the east, in a small area of the Florida Panhandle to the south, and west into Mississippi. Although the distribution range is fairly large, it is not a common species. According to Skinner, the Alabama azalea is low growing, 2 to 3 feet at most, and somewhat small flowered. He wrote, "The Alabama azalea has been induced by environment and the insects to produce a taller and much showier canescence-influenced phase with big, round, pincushion flower balls. As luck has it, this is the form most readily available from commercial sources." And that is the form we have in our collection too. May white azalea, Rhododendron eastmanii. This is a recent new species. It was named and documented in 1999. The native range. It's only found in South Carolina and mostly on north-facing slopes near limestone. Our plants were wild collected in Sumter National Forest, Clinton, South Carolina. The Red Hills azalea, Rhododendron colemanii. Newly recognized species. This was in 2008. Our plant came to us from Coleman Nurseries with the name Coleman's May Pink in 1977, long before it was determined to be a species. Skinner paid a visit to Mr. S.D. Coleman of Coleman Nurseries, who, quote, "provided a valuable lead to a curious little May-flowering white azalea of central Georgia and Alabama, hitherto overlooked." Cumberland azalea, Rhododendron cumberlandense. It is often misidentified, even by experts, as Rhododendron calendulaceum. When I read this, it kind of restored my self-confidence because it is true. When you look at that cumberlandense and it can easily confuse you and you can think it's a calendulaceum or vice versa. And I spent a long time studying the plants, scratching my heads and pulling out all the different resources I have for trying to get it ID'd correctly. June 9th, 1951. Red and orange flowered plants on Pine Mountain in Letcher County, Kentucky. Also higher elevations in Owsley County on a rocky cliff face. Skinner wrote, "Perhaps the finest single Kentucky collecting point was on a fire tower hill in west central Knox County. The road up this hill was one of those eroded rock and mud affairs, which may have been passable to a Jeep in good weather, but which caused the Chevrolet to rest quietly near the main highway during an attack on foot." In Georgia on Branch Mountain, Skinner wrote, "It was on this mountain that a spot of brilliant red, like a scarlet tail light, shone from the top of a cliff bordering the new highway 136. This little beacon was too fascinating to pass up, even though the only approach lay by way of a long flanking climb. But the reward was a tiny, twiggy, rock-clinging azalea plant 6 inches high, a foot across, and covered like a pincushion with its little red bells. As extreme a form of Rhododendron cumberlandense as one could hope to find, and a gem for the garden if its habitat is not unduly altered by cultivation." In Georgia, it was also seen on mountain slopes above Lake Winfield Scott, near the summit of Mount Oglethorpe, and east of Wolf Pen Gap in Bogle State Park. June 18th, 1951, Nantahala region of North Carolina, a few miles across the Georgia border, in a deep valley on the approach to Wayabald, also in Jackson County, near Kyles on Crow Mountain, which is in northern Alabama, and on Mount Cheaha, Alabama's highest point in Talladega County. We have a wild collected plant from Gregory Bald in the Great Smoky Mountains of Swain County, North Carolina. I was struck when I found this photograph of Gregory Bald because it looks like the picture of the Cumberland azalea just to the right of it. It looks like it just walked right off that photograph. It's quite an amazing scene. Sweet azalea, rhododendron arborescens. This was first described by John Bartram in 1814. Skinner wrote, "The sweet azalea tends to be quite variable in certain characteristics and throughout its range from New England to Georgia and Alabama. It may be variable in habit from low, widespreading, and bush in open places to tall and leggy in denser woods. Its foliage may be glaucous beneath or entirely green. Its corolla may be pure white or carry yellow blotches of varying intensity. And in flower size, it may be a plant of mediocre attraction to one of quite outstanding quality." We have a plant like this, the mediocre one. And when I read this description, I felt so much better because I was certain, based on the morphological characteristics, that the plant was a sweet azalea. But it didn't look anything near as beautiful as our other sweet azaleas. It was so mediocre is the best way to describe it. So plants like that make me question myself, you know, am I the right person for this job? June 18th, 1951, Georgia near Cloudland in DeKalb County, growing in a moist valley with Catawba rhododendron. June 24th, 1951, Mountain Lake, Virginia, and on Mount Pisgah, North Carolina. Pisgah National Forest on approach to Gregory Bald. July 12th, 1951, Upson County of central Georgia along the Flint River. Skinner wrote, "The search consumed nearly a full day, but the azalea was at last found in splendid quantity and, strangely enough, in full bloom, in spite of this low elevation so far south. In pure white flower, it followed the banks of a small, moccasin-infested tributary of the Flint River. The same azalea by all outward characteristics as its counterpart of 800 miles away in West Virginia." We have a wild collected plant from Avery County, North Carolina. It's significant. I want to bring your attention to what he's saying about it having the same outward characteristics as its counterpart of 800 miles away, because a lot of his writings talk about the variations when you move from area to area and state to state, and ecological region to ecological region. So it was quite remarkable that that azalea seemed to be the same as the one he found 800 miles away. Swamp azalea, rhododendron viscosum. According to Henry Skinner, swamp azalea was the first to reach England from Virginia in 1680. It took second place only to the tulip tree as an attraction at Fulham Palace, the residence of the colorful Bishop Compton. July 6, 1951. It's found on Parson Bald in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. July 18th, 1951. It's seen in Jones County, Mississippi, southeastern Louisiana. July 28th, 1951, seen in Effingham County, Georgia. Skinner and his cohorts also observed it in the Carolinas, Virginia, Maryland, Philadelphia, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and finally on Martha's Vineyard on August 8th, 1951. Our wild collected plants are all from Connecticut. A sphagnum swamp in Thompson, from Woodstock, and from Waterford, rescued from a site about to be developed as a shopping mall. They are also coming up on their own in the Arboretum. The plumleaf azalea, Rhododendron prunifolium. On July 12, 1951, Skinner observed this species in the Fort Gaines area in Georgia. And he wrote, both Fort Gaines and Cuthbert are situated in a region where the clays of the rising coastal plain have been cut into deep gullies by small meandering streams. The sides are often so steep that the only access is by wading the stream. And one is almost forced to do this in spite of the water moccasins by the dense catbrier tangles of the wooded surroundings. It is in these gullies of a few Georgia and Alabama counties that Rhododendron prunifolium is at home. The native range is southwestern Georgia and eastern Alabama, and it is listed as threatened in the state of Georgia. Rhodora, Rhododendron canadense. Richard M. Smith saw these in flower the 1st of June in Arcadia National Park on the Cadillac Mountain Trail around the summit. He also observed it on Cape Cod National Seashore in Massachusetts. The native range is low-lying areas of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, throughout New England, and into eastern Canada. In 1825, the first recorded hybrids were produced using North American deciduous azaleas. Pink puff azalea is a natural hybrid of Rhododendron cumberlandense and Rhododendron arborescens. This is a David Leach hybrid. The original plant was collected by Dr. Leach in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. It is salmon pink with an orange-yellow dorsal blotch, and the bloom time is late June to early July. Choptank River azaleas. These are natural hybrids and selections found in the vicinity of the Choptank River in Delaware and Maryland. Parents include Rhododendron atlanticum, Ostrinum, and Paraclamonoides. June Bride azalea is described as an advanced generation natural hybrid with sweet azalea and Cumberland azalea. It is also a plant that was introduced by Dr. Leach. It has white flowers with a yellow dorsal blotch, red stigma changing to pink at the base. So those are some of our, they're in our collection here. You can see them. The oldest native azaleas are located on a level area of the Arboretum, bordering a red maple swamp with high dappled shade provided by tulip trees and magnolias. During the 1970s, the native azalea collection was expanded considerably by Connecticut College botany professor Sally Taylor. With a deep appreciation for native azaleas, Sally would often return from personal travel with her car full of plants that she had purchased for the Arboretum. When a donor stepped forward in 1978, the Nancy Moss Fine Native Azalea Garden was established. This memorial garden, which contains most of our native azaleas, is located on a west-facing slope with an appropriate combination of sun and shade at different times of the day. Our arboretum provides excellent woodland conditions to grow native azaleas. Azaleas are low maintenance. They thrive in light shade or part-day sun. It's interesting to see how the garden changed over time. Unfortunately, the views are not all taken in the same place. So our Connecticut native azaleas, they include, we have all of them that are locally wild collected. The Pinkster bloom azalea, Rhododendron paraclimenoides, rose shell azalea, Rhododendron printophyllum, and swamp azalea, Rhododendron viscosum. Handwritten arboretum records indicate 2 swamp azaleas were wild collected in a sphagnum swamp near Little Pond in Thompson, Connecticut, September 1, 1947, by Richard H. Goodwin, Arboretum Director at the time. We also have 3 swamp azalea plants that were rescued from land being developed for a shopping center off Cross Road in Waterford, Connecticut in 1985 by then Arboretum Director Glenn Dreyer. There are 13 rose shell azaleas that had been donated by H. Lincoln Foster during the 1940s, who had wild collected them from his property in Falls Village, Connecticut. Mr. Foster, a teacher and a horticulturist, is the author of Rock Gardening, A Guide to Growing Alpines and Other Wildflowers in the American Garden. The gift of the 13 rose shell azaleas is one of our best assets for our native azalea collection. Pinkster bloom azalea was collected by Assistant Director horticulturist James T. Robinson from a utility right-of-way in one of the natural areas of the Arboretum. There are 42 Pinkster bloom azaleas present in the collection that came from seed collected by Robinson in 1980. During October 1979, Robinson also wild collected seed from North Carolina for the flame azalea. 3 of these plants are still growing in the Nancy Moss Vine Azalea Garden. Phenology data is something we still collect. And this chart was prepared in 1984 by Glenn Dreyer. Sally Traylor was also recording phenology data on the native azaleas in different years. Collected over decades, data like this helps us to understand the impact of climate warming on the azalea collection. In 2018, we achieved national accreditation by the Plant Collections Network of the American Public Gardens Association. The APGA is the leading professional organization for the field of public horticulture. The accreditation is the standard of excellence in plant collections management, acknowledging the Arboretum's commitment to the conservation and care of native azaleas curated at the highest professional level. The application and evaluation process took place over the course of a year with extensive study and documentation of plants, which culminated in a day-long series of tours and interviews with an outside expert. Couldn't have been done. That level of effort could not have been done, and that achievement could not have been done without teamwork from the other members of the Arboretum staff. That's the last slide.